We are live, sir.
All right. Good morning from here, from the Center of Southeast Asian Studies, Gender Group International Affairs, OP Gender Global University here in India. And of course, good afternoon in Australia, and of course, Chiang Mai, and almost afternoon in Yangon in Myanmar as well. And this is a part of a lecture series the Center for Southeast Asian Studies has been organizing for the past several years. And we are fortunate to have some distinguished speakers on a topic of Myanmar's 2000 election, the way forward. Election is going to take place in not very long from now, on November 8th, and we would like to see from each speaker from different perspectives of what might happen, what is at stake, and what we are likely to see in the aftermath of the election. So without taking much further time, I would like to invite my research assistant Nicolas to address and to give the welcome address.
Thank you, Professor. So, good morning to everyone, and especially to the distinguished speakers. So, our center is organizing the second event, and our topic for today's discussion is Myanmar 2020 elections, the way forward. So, our distinguished speakers has years of experience on this issue. So, we will like to hear from them. So, I firstly invite our first speaker, Dr. Nicholas Farley. Dr. Nicholas Farley is currently a professor and head of social sciences at University of Tasmania. From 2017 to 2019, he was associate dean in the Australian National University College of Asia and Pacific Studies. Professor Farley was also the inaugural director of the Australian National University Myanmar Centre, and over the past 15 years has widely published on political and social issues of Myanmar. Professor Farley has undertaken extensive research in Naypyidaw and Yangon, and also in Kachin, Shan, and Rakhine state of Myanmar. So, Professor Farley is going to talk on the topic of electoral democracy. So, welcome, Professor Farley. Our second speaker is Dr. Cho Sen. Dr. Sen has been head of Department of International Relations at University of Yangon since 2006. He was promoted to the post of professor in 2011, and now taking charge of both IR and political science at University of Yangon. She has been to an Australian National University under academic exchange program from May to June 2015, and presented a paper on institutions in Myanmar in Myanmar Update Conference, and later was published in the book, namely Conflict in Myanmar, War by Nick Cheeseman and Norwegian Institute of November 2016 as a research fellow, and did her research on assessing EU and ASEAN outlook on One Belt, One Road initiative. She has also participated in international conferences as panel, and her major discussions are on Myanmar and regional and international affairs. So, welcome, Dr. Sen. Our third distinguished speaker is Dr. Ashley South. Dr. South has 20 years of experience as an independent author, researcher, and he has a PhD from the Australian National University, and did his from School of Oriental and African at the University of London, and is Myanmar and Mindanao, politics of language and climate change, resilience and varieties of adaptation. So,
Because you have to unmute your speaker.
sorry. So, Dr. Min Jo is an expert in Myanmar affairs and has been involved in the ongoing peace process in Myanmar since its beginning. As executive director of MIPS, Min led the organization implementation of policy research and analysis in support of the peace dialogue and security transition. Prior to joining MIPS, Min was the executive director of the Technical Secretariat Center of the Joint Ceasefire Monitoring Committee that implements the military provision of the National Ceasefire Agreement. Min set up the first joint conference mechanism to implement the nationwide ceasefire agreement. He is also an advisor to the Peace Commission, the government body responsible for engaging the various armed ethnic group in the peace process. So, without further delay, I want to hand over to Dr. Kipgin for the further discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Vikas. It seems you have a very bad connection. I just would like to apologize on behalf of Vikas because much of his introduction was not audible because of the network problem. And for those who come late, my name is Negin Pao Kipgen. I'm Executive Director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies, who organizes this event. And before I invite each speaker, I would like to lay down a few rules. Each speaker will have 15 minutes each. Then we will have a question and answer session. And I would like to request each participant, if you have any questions, please submit them to the chat box. I'm going to go through those questions in the chat box and we'll ask those questions to the speaker. And for security purpose or for the proper flow of this discussion, our IT person is unmuting everyone except the speakers and who are going to take part in this session. So please make sure that you submit your questions in the chat box. All right, before I invite the first speaker, again, I just want to remind everyone, so please submit your questions in the chat box so that we have plenty of questions and we can go over during the Q&A session. And now I would like to first invite Professor Nicholas Farley, and who is going to talk about electoral democracy. So you have 15 minutes, please.
Great, thanks very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. And I'm deeply appreciative to the team at OP Jindal Global University for the kind invitation to be part of what's going to be a really lively, robust and interesting conversation. And the fact that I'm joining so many old friends in discussion today is a great pleasure. I think we all appreciate that when it comes to electoral democracy in Myanmar, the looming election is happening under simply remarkable conditions. And those conditions, of course, we are all incredibly attentive to, whether it's politics, health, the economy. There's a great deal about 2020, which has proved to be volatile and uncertain, temperamental, turbulent even. The fact that Myanmar's electoral authorities, the political parties, the people at large have managed to work through this rolling series of crises and are now reasonably confident that we will see an election next month is again a testament to resilience, to creativity, and also to a sense that whatever this year has thrown at us, it's required a great deal of collective effort to get to grips with the situation first of all, and then to put in place appropriate responses. I happen to be here today in Hobart, the capital of Tasmania, an island off the coast of southern Australia, where I've been marooned, fair to say, ladies and gentlemen, since our border was closed with the rest of Australia back in March. And so from this vantage, I feel somewhat peculiar offering this style of assessment of Myanmar political affairs, but I think that given the opportunities that this technology offers us for conversations that are untethered by many of the ordinary constraints, we need to make the most of what's possible right now. And it's great to see that there are so many of you around this room, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments as we go. So I've got 4 key points that I'd like to make about electoral democracy in Myanmar, and I'm going to get through these quickly, and ideally I won't even need all of my allocated 15 minutes. The first of these 4 key points is about the consistency with which Myanmar is now holding elections. It wasn't so long ago, certainly within the recollection of many of us around a Zoom room like this one, that Myanmar had no elections and no serious prospect of elections. And yet here we are with a 3rd election in a row. This consistency is remarkable for so many different reasons. One of the elements of this story of consistency is almost astrological in its precision. So it was actually back on the 6th of November 2005 that the trucks left Yangon, and they were loaded up as the then military government went about establishing its formal presence in the new capital of Naypyidaw. Then it was the 7th of November. I hope you're seeing the pattern here. We started with the 6th, then it was the 7th of November 2010 that the first general election was held under the 2008 constitution. Then on the 8th of November 2015, you can all see the pattern now. We had the second general election when the NLD, as we appreciate, did so incredibly well at the ballot box. And now in 2020, interestingly, intriguingly, we haven't gone to the 9th of November. We're back stuck on the 8th of November. What I'd suggest about this kind of pattern is that there has been a plan. And the plan, of course, has a constitutional framework around it. It has a range of political negotiations, nowadays even a political coalition, which has allowed Myanmar to move past those very dark decades of military dictatorship into something different, imperfect, sure, but into a system where the consistency of electoral action is now almost starting to be taken for granted. And many of Myanmar's neighbours, as we all appreciate, can't claim anything like that kind of unbroken run of relatively open competition that might lead to predictable enough outcomes, but in a system where plenty of people get to have their say. So the second point then, as I'm bustling along here, is about that style of competition. And of course, it's going to be constrained by the pandemic this time around. And I think we guess, and it's only a guess because of the lack of hard data on many of the variables, but we guess that the National League for Democracy could be quite vulnerable in some of the ethnic areas where they did so well last time. Of course, at the national level, the betting money, if there is any, is still on Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and her team, securing some style of majority, a majority that is then going to further consolidate the strengths that they draw from their incumbent position, and that will also lead to at least some level of renegotiation around ethnic politics, yes, but also in terms of civil-military relations. And I know that later on today, we're going to hear more about both of those topics. And I think it's really important that we have front of mind that this is a dynamic situation, one where some of the old certainties, of course, will be upended by Myanmar's response over the years to come to 2020's pandemic. My third point then is about a real complication, something that we didn't have to contend with, that Myanmar didn't have within its framework back in 2015 at the last general election. That is a somewhat, partially, but substantially shattered international reputation. And so what this means in practice is that people outside Myanmar in general, there are exceptions of course, are probably less enamored of a democracy when it appears to facilitate all manner of awkward, unfortunate, and in some cases utterly criminal activities by government agencies. And it's the facilitation in particular of ethnic cleansing in the Rakhine State, as is now being investigated by a wide range of bodies, including at the United Nations level, that are a difficult extra consideration and complication for Myanmar's electoral evolution. We don't know for sure. Of course, I'd love to hear views from around this room, but Our best appreciation is that the policies that were put in place by a number of governments to include the incumbents against the Rohingya and a range of other ethnic minority populations with varying levels of vulnerability are actually really quite popular. Does that make them moral? I'd suggest not. But a new government, a government with a fresh mandate from this 2020 election, perhaps has a small chance of recovering some of that diminished international standing. That's going to be important for all of us to bear in mind because, of course, right now, the level of international financial support flowing towards Myanmar has a question mark over it. There are all sorts of other questions about the country's geopolitical position. And of course, perhaps most acutely, there is the very greatly diminished relationship between Myanmar and Bangladesh. And while that bilateral relationship might seem like an obscure concern, Bangladesh has made much of its response to the Rohingya refugee crisis, and that has, to an extent at least, improved that country's international standing at a time when Myanmar has been heading in a very different direction. How all of that plays out after this election is going to be really important to watch, and perhaps a government with a fresh mandate could do something different, perhaps, to my mind at least, do something better. The fourth point then is about electoral democracy itself being insufficient for Myanmar's success. And, we could rattle off a really long list of other factors, but there's poverty, of course, inequality as a related issue, environmental damage, ethnic exclusion, climate change, something that we all face. Even down here in Tasmania, climate change is a very real and very present concern with all sorts of different political ramifications. Myanmar is going to be grappling with those issues at the same time as it's seeking to recover in a meaningful sense from all of the upheavals that the pandemic has unleashed. So while those of us who've spent a lot of time in Myanmar and sought to appreciate its strengths know that there is an abundance of talent, so many motivated, energetic, creative people, there's also weakness in the country's institutions. Some of that weakness, I'd suggest, comes from the fact that dominant voices have tended to be in charge for a long time. And so the NLD itself, whatever its important historic role in shifting Myanmar towards a more democratic system and a more accountable system of governance, has tended to privilege a certain limited number of voices who are prepared to stay in charge well into their 70s or 80s. And the fact that that gerontocracy has been retained through this democratic evolution is something that's probably not going to last for decade after decade. How, therefore, might Myanmar through this election and hopefully the election after find space for different kinds of voices, for people who are prepared to challenge some of the status quo and some of the common sense impressions of how things are going to be done. We all appreciate that access to information is just crucial. And there's been a revolution in Myanmar, even during the 15 or 20 years that I've been regularly living in or visiting the country. That's been remarkable, astonishing, and frankly, quite awesome. And the decision makers who made all of that possible should be congratulated. But we know that the curtailment of civil liberties is still a serious threat. Another serious threat, of course, is unfettered hate speech. And that's tricky for all of us to handle. And Myanmar, of course, has got some particular vulnerabilities. So I don't judge to conclude that we need to be passing judgment on Myanmar's efforts. That's not the point of this kind of analysis and conversation and discussion. Instead, I think we need to be imagining different ways of building international support for positive change in the country, appreciating that this year has been really quite horrific for so many societies around the world. while Myanmar appears to have missed so much that has been absolutely terrible in 2020, we can't forget that the country actually faces an almost permanent health crisis, whether it's tuberculosis or malaria or HIV. Myanmar has a stretched health system at the best of times. And so as we're thinking about the political implications, about these elections that are looming next month, we certainly have to bear in mind that so many people in Myanmar are doing their best under imperfect circumstances. We hope that they'll have an opportunity to cast their votes freely and fairly, and that their decision will ultimately help to drive Myanmar's next stage of reform and transformation. And certainly from down here in sunny Tasmania, I wish all of my Myanmar friends the very best of luck with the opportunities and challenges ahead. And I'm really keen to see where we go in this conversation this afternoon. Again, thanks very much to the team at OP Jindal for the invitation, and look forward to all of your questions and comments.
All right, thanks, Nick. Dr. Nicholas Farley, especially those who have come a little bit late. He is a professor and head of social sciences, University of Tasmania in Australia. And for latecomers especially, I just would like to reiterate the fact that we are recording this entire event and will be broadcasting this in YouTube, and it will be live for public view sometime this afternoon or perhaps tomorrow morning. Now, again, thank you to the first speaker, Dr. Nicolas, for finishing your lecture just on time, 20 minutes. So I hope the next speakers also would stick to the time. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Chocho Singh, Professor and Head of Political Science and International Relations, University of Yangon. You have 20 minutes, Professor Singh.
Thank you. So may I wish you Ming Laba, and thank you for giving me the chance to join this talk. So for today's discussion, let me share my thoughts on the economic outlook and foreign relations. So as you all know, the year 2020 will be the challenging year for Myanmar economy due to the COVID-19 pandemic that really coincide with our general election in coming November. It is coming very soon. So everyone is interesting. The NLD party, which won the landslide victory in 2015 election, will definitely face big challenges as the socioeconomic condition of people hasn't changed much as they expected, even though the government slogan always flies as people are the key. So the question is what we can expect from Myanmar economic outlook and its foreign relations in 2020 and beyond. So here, I will highlight three main points. The first point that I would like to highlight is about the economic vision of the NLD administration, its efforts and effects. So with the aim to become the Asian financial destination target, Myanmar has set up its economic outlook with series of reforms under the first transitional government and 12 economic economic policy under the second transitional government, which I mean is the current government. So the NLD administration economic vision is to achieve the inclusive and sustainable economic development with national reconciliation, equitable development, protection of natural resources, and job creation. So to implementing the economic outlook, we can say that the release of the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan in 2018, the reorganizing of the Ministry of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations in 2019 for channeling the international financial institutions such as World Bank and ADB to secure aid, soft loans, technical assistance, policy support, and project implementation are the some salient points of government. Because with the help of this World Bank, the Central Bank of Myanmar can draft the national payment system strategy to make payment system and accounting systems for efficient while supporting the fiscal stability and economic development. So major reforms under this government has taken place in 2019, like a liberalization of the Myanmar investment sector, the launch of the micro on the website of the Tiger. This make it easy for the local investors to register for the investments. So with that installation and the liberalization, according to the Tiger website, I found out that more than over 30,000 new companies have registered, and the introducing of this, the liberalization brought Myanmar ranking in the doing business report from 152 to 70. What I'm saying is it is according to the Tiger report. Now let me move on to a second point, the challenges of the NLD efforts for its economic outlook. So after taking office, the NLD government faced, the chronic political challenges like what Nick have already mentioned. But I would like to add here the new armed conflict with the Arakan army, which expanded with large Rakhine community support. It is really frustrating for all of us. And another one is the accusation of the human rights violation of the military in the northern Rakhine state. And the final one is the current COVID-19 pandemic. These are the serious challenges that the current government has been facing. So regarding with the accusation of the human rights violation, the United States and the EU countries pressure to pay attention to this issue to Myanmar and to accept the UN facts-finding mission reports. And to ease this accusation and to illustrate that Myanmar is not a country conducting the ethnic cleansing, State Councilor went to The Hague last year to explain at the ICJ with, to respond to the accusation of the Gambia. However, rejecting all these accusations, the US and EU consider to revoke the generalized system of preference status granted to Myanmar. And as you know, the flight of thousands of the Bengali Muslim community into neighboring Bangladesh and mistrust on governments handling the conflict led these reluctant to foreign investors to invest in Myanmar. And these political challenges led to the government's significant decline in foreign investment. Another challenge for economic outlook is COVID-19 pandemic that we are facing today. The World Bank report on the global economic prospect assessed that the impact of the COVID-19 on world economy has the deepest global recession with a baseline envisioning 5.2%. So in this context, it is a question for us to Myanmar to address how the pandemic will affect its economy and which sector will be the biggest hit. I do believe that every country has been facing, and our country as a developing has a big impact, for example, like tourism sector, manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and FDI, of course. So in our country, tourism plays important, the SMEs plays important, the small and medium enterprises manufacturing sector represent 99%. So among these, the garment manufacturing is becoming hardly hit by COVID-19. And most of the garment manufacturing is mostly owned by the Chinese companies. So to effectively implement the economic recovery plan as a response to COVID-19, the ministry has issued the COVID-19 Economic Relief Plan, CERP, and it consists of policy proposal to support the country's agriculture sector and loans for the SME business. Now, let me come to the final point, the impact on the foreign relations for the economic outlook. So since opening up the democratic transition in 2011, as you know, Myanmar expects investment, especially from the West. This is because we have been over-depending on China. So let's go with the political transition by inviting the investment from the West. However, EU and US interactions with Myanmar has implications regarding with the human rights issues. EU facing with its own domestic issues today, and US American First policy steered Myanmar to its new economic direction of Look East policy with South Korea, Japan, and China. So we can say that this policy coincides with South Korea's new Southern policy by observing President Moon's visit in September 2019. And his constructive visit paved way to launch Korea-Myanmar Industrial Complex, which we believe that this can really contribute for the job opportunity and technological transfer for Myanmar. And Korea also actively joined the very first International Investment Summit in January 2019 in Naypyidaw in order to raise the investment from East Asia. Another country is Japan, which has been a major development partner for Myanmar in fulfilling the socio-economic development. So Japan's policy on Myanmar can be considered in the context of regional cooperation too. And since Myanmar transition, Japan plays an important role in foreign direct investment, especially in the special economic zone. So Japan is taking interest of opening a new special economic zone besides the existing one that is in one state of Myanmar, where the location can be easily connected to the Greater Mekong sub-region East-West Economic Corridor. So since Japan has been the major financer for the development of the Greater Mekong, the planned special economic zone could also be easily connected to the existing SEZ through the local transport network. So the project is hoped to be, if completed, can create the job opportunities, especially for the migrant workers, because as you know, Mon State is very much close to the Thailand, who returned back from the Thailand due to the impact of the COVID-19. And we can also see from the strategic point of view that these SEZ can be assumed as part of the Japan's connectivity strategy to formulate free and open Indo-Pacific. We can see this policy very clearly in the Japan's 2017 white paper. The Japan's Indo-Pacific is a vision to combine both Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So in this case, Myanmar is a very important in strategic location. And furthermore, the vision of India and Japan toward free and Indo-Pacific is clearly stated during the Prime Minister Modi visit to Japan in October 2018. So under the FYB strategy, Japan strategically uses its official development assistance to contribute actively to the prosperity, stability, and peace of the international community, as well as to protect the national interests of Japan. So Myanmar Look East policy will also focus on China. Of course, we cannot neglect that China, as China is a big neighbor for us. And one interesting thing is China ranked top in the FDI list, but it has some negative sentiment because of the extractive investment like hydropower dam, coal mining. So this has been the negative sentiment from Myanmar people due to the environmental impact of Myanmar economy. However, I must say that Myanmar cannot neglect and miss the train of the Belt and Road Initiative. So under BRI, China-Myanmar Economic Corridor is now it's a part, and some projects under the CMEC, the corridor, are in the implementation process of the Jiaopyu Special Economic Zone, the Border Economic Cooperation Zone, and the Yangon Urban Development Project. As the corridor is linking the least and the most developed areas of Myanmar, it is expected that the corridor will support the country's economic outlook. This might also contribute the NLD's economic vision. However, from the other side, from the perspective of the local people, there are also some challenges regarding with these investment. Sorry. And another notable support of China on Myanmar's socio-economic development is within the framework of Lansan Mekong Economic Cooperation in 2016. Under this LMC, Myanmar received $1 million for the special fund projects such as agriculture, cultural sector, and connectivity. Besides, Myanmar Look East policy For the enhancing of economic relations with India is also very important, as India is our big neighbor. And the recent visit of the Foreign Secretary and Army Chief this month, we can see that the building of the petroleum refinery in Dalian and the signing for the oil refinery of the Dalian. The Dalian is nearby Yangon. And the estimated investment is $6 billion investment. So hopefully to support Myanmar's technology and socio-economic development in the future. So let me conclude my talk by saying that the challenges are really ahead of the Myanmar's economic outlook in 21st century. And there were high hopes for better times when NLD won the election. Speculation of investment from Western countries would make contribution for the development, creation of millions of jobs. However, the government has not achieved appreciable economic development. So in turn, it looked toward the Loki's policy. However, again, it is anxiety for Myanmar's diversion of Loki's policy, as these East Asian countries are also in the situation of economic recession. And the global market will take time to wake up. So for the foreign direct investment that we are expecting, there will be a slow pace as every country in the world, including East Asia, is facing its economic problems, which in turn led to unemployment for Myanmar migrant workers. So under the NLD government, it is slow in the process to reach the targets of its economic outlook. Hopefully after the election, maybe there will be some changes for the economic outlook. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
All right, thank you so much, Cho. Professor Cho Seng from University of Yangon. Of course, I believe that the listeners, the participants will raise questions based on the lecture or the talk that you have just given. I want to remind again everyone, please submit your questions in the chat box, because I'm going to go through those questions during the Q&A session, and the speaker will try to answer as much as possible. You are free to ask any question relating to Myanmar's upcoming election and of course the domestic politics as well as its foreign relations. And again, thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for finishing on time. Now, I would like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Ashley Shao, a research fellow, Center for Ethnic Studies and Development, Chiang Mai University, Thailand. You have 15 minutes, please.
Thank you, Professor Negin Pao and colleagues. I've been asked to talk about minorities, the peace process, and federalism in Myanmar in the context of the elections. So that's quite a lot to cover in 15 minutes. But please allow me to begin with a brief anecdote, which I hope illustrates some of the themes that I will discuss. So I want to go back 5 years to the 2015 dry season. So this is the run up to the historic 2015 elections in Myanmar. And I was walking through an area of Myanmar in eastern Bago region, controlled by the Karen National Union, which many of you will know is one of the main ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar that has a ceasefire with the government dating back to 2012. So this is a non-state controlled part of the country. Just to be clear, we're not talking about the Thailand border. This is an area well inside Myanmar. I should also clarify that my Burmese language skills are rubbish, but my Karen is passable. And so I was able to talk to local villagers about their perception of the situation. So I asked people, what country do you live in? And I got to kind of look like, why would you ask? Of course, we live in Kothule, we live in Karen state. And I asked, well, how about the government? And I was told, well, the government of this country is the KNU. So my next question was, how about the forthcoming elections? And of course, I was talking about the November 2015 elections. And again, people looked at me like I was crazy. And when I asked if anyone was planning to vote in the 2015 elections, it's like suggesting that I would vote in the Indian elections. And people said, no, that's an election for their country. Our country is not really so much relevant. And the basic perception that I hope this brief anecdote communicates is that for these Karen score animist villagers living well inside Myanmar, their perception was that they lived in a country that was not part of the polity of Myanmar. And I think that this is a really important point to make, that for many ethnic nationality people living within the geographic borders of Myanmar, the state is not necessarily the main focus of political legitimacy. In this case, the ethnic armed organization, the Karen National Union, regarded as far more credible and legitimate as a governing authority than the internationally recognized state. So this anecdote, I think, allows me to get into the question of the meaning of minorities and nationalities. I've been asked, as I said, to look at the situation of ethnic minorities, the peace process, and federalism. And of course, referring to the ethnic people of Myanmar as minorities is common usage, and it's a fairly well-known term internationally, with legal and normative implications in, for example, terms of access to minority rights. Sometimes the terminology that's used is indigenous rights. I think that for many of Myanmar's ethnic people, particularly elites who are perhaps more interested in political affairs and more interested in expressing views on these issues, ethnic nationality is a far more widely used term rather than minorities. I think that's the most common, and indeed I believe, perhaps Dr. Minzo, who can correct me afterwards if I'm wrong, this is the official English translation of the Myanmar term Tayintha. So why am I making this distinction between minorities and nationalities? I think the use of ethnic nationality by ethnic elites in Myanmar has connotations regarding the status of ethnic communities and at least implicit claims to sovereignty. And of course, with my earlier anecdote, we'll see that for many ethnic communities, sovereignty is focused more on the local self-determination of subunits which have never really been incorporated into the state of Myanmar. And that brings us on perhaps to the second topic in the title I've been asked to speak to, which is federalism. And without making too much of a diversion into theories of political science, we can distinguish, I think, between federalizing and federating processes. And generally, I think for ethnic nationality actors in Myanmar, the question is how to achieve an effective federating process. So there is an understanding, I think, that is shared among most ethnic nationality political leaders in Myanmar. I'd be interested to, if Kun Oka has some comments afterwards, to maybe comment on this in relation to the current peace process and particularly the situation of the Pa'o community. But since the Panglong Agreement of February 1947, which was fundamental to establishing the Constitution of 1948, and which led to, August 1947, which led to independence in 1948, there's been an unfinished state building and nation building enterprise in Myanmar. And in terms of the ethnic political dimension, I think the lack of serious provisions to allow for ethnic self-determination means that this process of achieving a credible state based on a federating process among different units, which are very historically concerned about maintaining their own claims to sovereignty, this unfinished business is fundamental to understanding the conflicts which have affected Myanmar for so many decades. So this brings us on to the question of federalism, of course, and I would agree with most commentators that some kind of federal political settlement is essential to resolving these conflicts. But I think we have to be careful, because often in Myanmar, federalism is identified with territory and the mapping of ethnicity onto territory. And this can be quite problematic, because in Myanmar, access to public life and indeed citizenship is only possible through membership of one of the 135 officially recognized ethnic national identities. And this is deeply problematic for at least two reasons. First, the official list of 135 ethnic categories is deeply problematic. It's arbitrary, there are many errors and faults. And of course, the politicization of access to public life and citizenship through participation in these 135 official ethnic categories is particularly dramatically unjust and has caused a great deal of violence and suffering in the case of the Rohingya, because I think, as is well known, the Rohingya Lumyo, the Rohingya identity, is not officially recognized in Myanmar. But I think even more problematic, or more problematic for other parts of the country also, is the notion that federalism is to do with the mapping of these ethnic identities onto territorial areas. If Myanmar was a country where different ethnic communities lived quite discreetly side by side, it should be possible theoretically then to decentralize, to have some kind of federal system which allowed for discrete ethnic territories, each of which would be homogenous. But of course, it's not like that. Communities live side by side and overlapping. So if federalism focuses particularly on the mapping of ethnic identities onto homelands and motherlands, this can be quite problematic, and I think can be a recipe for ethnic cleansing. So in that case, I think we should try to think about what solutions might look like. I want to suggest that the acceptance broadly of 7 main ethnic nationality states in Myanmar might be a good place to start. Of course, this can be unpacked and there will be different dissenting voices, but generally speaking, the existence of the 7 ethnic nationality states seems to be fairly broadly accepted. And so I think in this case, the focus in recent negotiations in the peace process on establishing state constitutions is really important and should be welcome and supported. And that brings me on to the third element I've been asked to talk about, which is the peace process. So given the limitations of time, I won't get into too much detail now about negotiations and the August Union Peace Conference and the prospects of the peace process continuing into 2021, all very important points which we can maybe look at in the question and answer session. But I would like to briefly talk about the nationwide ceasefire agreement of 2015, because of course it was 5 years ago today, and some of those who are in this Zoom room, particularly Dr. Min Zaw-u, of course, were there, as was I, sitting very much in the back row for myself, 5 years ago when the nationwide ceasefire was agreed. At the time, there was a lot of criticism of the NCA not being inclusive, and the criticism of the nationwide ceasefire agreement has generally increased in the intervening 5 years. Many of the criticisms are very valid, not least the whole issue of inclusivity. The 10 ethnic armed organizations which are currently in the NCA process, signatories to the NCA, represent only about 20% of Myanmar's non-state armed group troops. So this is obviously a very incomplete process in terms of inclusion and participation. I guess my view is slightly in the minority, that I do still think the NCA can be made to work and could be a model for a successful peace process, but there's a lot of caveats there, because at the moment, certainly there's a widespread perception that this is a failing peace process. However, the government and the Myanmar army consistently insist that the nationwide ceasefire agreement is the only vehicle for achieving peace in Myanmar. Yet at the same time, there seems to be not much evidence, at least since 2016 under the NLD-led government, of any real serious intention to implement the NCA in a way that is credible and meets the basic aspirations and concerns of ethnic communities. So I think one area for advocacy is to maybe insist a little bit more strongly that for the government and Myanmar army, if they're serious about the NCA being the only vehicle for achieving peace in Myanmar, then the army and the government have to be encouraged to address the problems in the NCA, particularly the issues around implementation, with a bit more seriousness. So at the risk perhaps of oversimplification, I want to suggest there are three main elements to the peace process in Myanmar. The first would be the political dialogue, which initially got off to a fairly good start. Through 2017, there were a series of subnational consultations in which ethnic communities began to develop positions on a variety of different issues under the five main categories of the political dialogue. And for many ethnic communities, such as, for example, the Karen, but I think also the Pa'o, this was arguably the first time in Myanmar's history that there had been this level of systematic sub-national consultation among ethnic communities to develop positions to then take forward to a union-level political dialogue. Almost too successful, I think, because since 2017, 2018, the Myanmar army has largely suppressed political dialogue at the subnational level, at least. And so very much unfinished business, and so far really not a credible political process within the peace process. The second element of the NCA would be security sector monitoring, the Joint Monitoring Committee. Someone may wish to push back on this, but I mean, I think the JMC is an example of the failures of the peace process. It's a deeply dysfunctional body dominated by the Myanmar army. So I think the intention was to have a joint monitoring committee where ethnic armed organizations and the Myanmar army could, with input from civil society actors, civilian peace monitors, address ceasefire concerns and any violations. But in fact, the Myanmar army has dominated the process to the extent that it's widely regarded, at least by the EAOs, as being a very unhelpful and dysfunctional body. So this is the second part of the peace process, which also needs reform. The third element of the peace process is interim arrangements, Jagala Asiasin in Burmese. I'm referring particularly to the nationwide ceasefire agreement, Article 25, which acknowledges that several of the larger ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar, including some of the signatories to the NCA, control quite extensive territory, de facto government type systems, although of course not internationally recognized, and that some of the EAOs in Myanmar therefore have quite significant and long-standing governance and administration functions and deliver services to conflict affected communities. So the NCA recognizes this, but again, the problem is implementation. There hasn't been an agreed mechanism for implementing interim arrangements within the NCA. So although I do still believe that the NCA has potential, there are a lot of problems regarding implementation that need to be addressed. There is some hope that following the August Union Peace Conference, that the agreement in principle to continue discussing the NCA under the next government in 2021 may allow some of these issues to be resolved. And I think this is where advocacy should focus. I do have some comments also on the forthcoming elections, particularly from the perspective of ethnic politics, but I can see my time is up already. So I'll say that in case there are some questions and opportunity to comment further at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Just 3 minutes over your time, but that's okay. We'll try to come back for the question and answer session. Hopefully, we have already received about 10 questions or so. Each one of you would have plenty of time to respond to those questions. Now, I'm going to invite the fourth speaker, Dr. Min Zhou, who is the Executive Director of Myanmar Institute for Peace and Security. He will be talking on the topic, the role of military in politics. You have 15 minutes, Dr. Wu. Please unmute your. Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the discussions. If we talk about the role of the military in politics, the 2008 Constitution is the prime issue to tackle with. So right before the military transition from the military rule to a hybrid democracy, the 2008 constitution was inaugurated, and then the military implemented the questionable elections in 2010. However, the new government coming in after 2010 had made a very significant transition arrangement, eventually leading to the 2015 elections that brought the NLD to power. So I compare these two eras and how the military behave and involved in politics, especially in the elections. So under the USDP-led government, so right before the USDP came to power, there was a special arrangement in the military junta. That was the removal of all senior officials from the military and send them to the USDP. And they eventually became the government officials. So that setup actually have a very significant impact on the sub-state and the union governments. When these senior officials were moved to the USDP, and when they became the ministers and chief ministers of the states and regional governments, they were quite confident. So compared to the current military commanders, including the commander-in-chief, they were very senior. So a lot of these states and regional chief minister practice their own mandates and in a high level of confidence. That means the military involvement in the states and regional government where strong state chief ministers exist is quite minimal. And one of the examples is like a police, the Ministry of Home Affairs. The Ministry of Home Affairs, the minister was a General Koko, who was very senior in the military. So the General Koko, according to our research, he did not take orders, or he did not even see the commander-in-chief in this 5 years. He only took orders from the president. So under that USDP-led government, and this special arrangement inevitably reduced the role of the military in the governance. And another example was the president established 10 border guard police battalions without even consulting with the commander-in-chief. So there was some complaint from the commander-in-chief because constitutionally, all the armed forces are under the direction of, under the supervision of the commander-in-chief. But that happened under the previous administration. And another significant was the Union Election Committee, which is led by former General Tin A. So he was the one who actually transformed the UEC to be more like independent electoral commissions. And actually he tried really hard to make the 2015 election free and fair to some extent. He was the one who allowed the international observers to come in and observe the election extensively. So the electoral reform happened under his supervisions. And because of his status, the military had almost no intervention in the UEC as well. However, there was a significant intervention from the military right before the 2015 election. That was the transfer of senior officials, Tamado senior officials to the USDP. So a large number of Tamado senior officials were retired and sent to the USDP, and they became the candidates in the area where they used to command or where they used to control the commands. So especially in Shan State, this is where the USCP has some stronghold in the northern Shan states and eastern Shan State as well. So in NLD, under the NLD-led government, there were some significant changes. So initially, there was supposed to be a good relationship between the NLD and the military. However, there was one major hiccup, which is the extension of the tenure of the commander-in-chief. So the commander-in-chief, after he reached 60 years, his extension, even though that extension was authorized by the military commission itself, it still needed a president's signature to complete the formalization of his tenure. But so far, the president did not sign, until this point, president did not sign the commander-in-chief extension of the tenure. Another consequence was the president did not form any committee in which the commander-in-chief was a member. So that setup, and also the state councilor setup. So the country was ruled by the state councilor, and the president was too quiet. But since the president did not set up any official committee, and also president did not call any National Defense and Security Council, practically there was no policy-making platform where the military and the government decision makers can meet and discuss. So that was a serious policy crisis coming out from the civil-military relation tensions, especially centering around the formalization of the tenure of the commander-in-chief. So that problems with the civil-military relation tension have impact on the peace process, impact on the governance as well. But still, the military involvement in the governance is quite limited. One of the significance compared to the previous eras, the military became more active engaging with the public, and the military public relation pages, when you look at it, you're going to see full of these pictures and videos of how the military is engaging with the public and providing assistance to the needy in many areas. And another example was when the Arakan Army was preparing its military operation in Rakhine State, military largely refrained from engaging the Arakan Army until January 2019. According to our data, the military did not engage the Arakan Army in Rakhine State, did not even insert any additional troops up to early 2019. So Arakan Army have well over 3 years of preparation in Rakhine State because the military did not want to upset Rakhine population, and they refrained from engaging the Arakan Army until early 2019. So that was some of the examples of how the military was promoting itself into the public spheres and trying to gain the public endorsement. And remarkably, this election, the military did not send its retired generals to the USCP anymore. We did not notice any large number or any significant individuals from the military were transferred to the USDP to the context of the elections this time. Compared to the last time, this time we did not see any obvious numbers at all. But what military was doing, and also there was some complaint, was there was some constituency, especially in Shan State and Kachin State, the voter turnout was low in 2015 elections. So military has been deploying troops to the area, and they will be voting in this constituency. So that can alter the turnout rate, and also that can alter the election result as well. So that was the only one significant election-related move by the military in 2020. And the military even like prohibit both the NLD and USDP from setting up billboards in the vicinity of the battalions as well. So the USDP and the military's connection is less visible in this election compared to the elections in 2015. And lastly, I would like to touch upon a little bit how ethnic armed groups will respond to the elections. So most of the EAOs in 2015 supported the NLD, and they asked their constituency to vote for the NLD. Actually, the area where the Dr. Ashley South cited, Bagul, that township where Dr. Ashley cited where the EAOs were operating, their turnout rate was about 60 to 70%, actually higher than some of the area where Burman dominated as well. And so, those areas where the NLD won significantly and overwhelmingly. But this time, the EAOs are now asking their constituency to vote for the ethnic parties and ethnic candidates. So that can shape, that can have an impact on the electoral landscape in two ways. In one way, those ethnic parties can win the seat in the constituencies. And the second way, that ethnic parties will likely steal votes from the NLD. So that means that reducing the NLD votes from winning the election. But at the same time, the ethnic party may not have enough vote to win the elections. And actually, the USDP can be a potential winner in some of the constituency. That phenomenon played out in Kachin State during the by-elections, where the Kachin party took the vote out from the NLD, and both the NLD and the Kachin party could not win, and the USDP become the winner. So the upcoming election could be interesting. So many projections are leading to the NLD's another victories, but what we cannot say for sure is even though NLD can win the majority of the seats, it is not sure that NLD can still form the government by winning the sufficient votes in the elections. So I'll be happy to discuss further in the question and answers. Thank you very much, and looking forward to talking further.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Wu. I want now all the speakers to turn on your camera. And we have about 14 questions, and definitely we are not going to be able to answer all those questions because we have about 18 minutes or so, but we'll try to go through as much as possible. I look at the questions and most of them are addressed to everyone, all the speakers, but I see a couple of questions which are addressed to specific speakers. So I'm going to start with Nicholas first. Yeah, the first question that comes from one of the participants is that, will election take place? I think, I mean, this is, I don't know why this is asked, but some people still have a question, a doubt whether there will be election at all. Will election take place? And what about Rohingyas franchise? You recall last time Kony, who raised his voice in the parliament, was assassinated. Is situation any different? Nicholas, to you.
Thanks very much. Great set of questions. I'll be brief in my response. Yes, I expect the election is going to go ahead. If it turns out, of course, that there's some great deterioration in the health and or the security situation, then that could be different. But for now, the preparations are well advanced. Political parties are doing their thing. Yes, they're a bit limited, but they'll get on with the job as best they can. My overall guess in terms of the conduct of the election is, given there's another major global election happening early in November, Myanmar is likely to be less shambolic than that other one. I'll leave you with that image for a moment. We're also going to, of course, need to bear in mind the Rohingya franchise or disenfranchisement, to be more precise. It's always been contested. That will remain the case. And as we've seen with the rollout of what might otherwise be a very helpful voting app or app with candidate information, there's all sorts of controversy around how ethnicity and religion is defined. And that's likely to stay with us well beyond this election. And the kind of circumstances that led to that tragic assassination are still with us as well. And so people in Myanmar, of course, are very attentive to the dangers that swirl around in many different directions. And we hope, of course, that this is an election that can be conducted without violence. But as Sayama Jojosen told us, the escalation of violence with the Arakan army has also been a whole new complication. And we can't ignore those facts on the ground either.
All right, thank you very much, Nicholas. Now I would like to go to Dr. Singh. This question is addressed to you. Here, 1 second. Discussions over the new Southern Policy 2.0 are prominent in the region at the moment. What does it mean to you and for Myanmar beyond economic investment?
Thank you very much for the question. And regarding with the new Southern Policy, in my discussion, I touch on the new Southern Policy, which is in line with the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan. So in the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, we also have 3 kinds of P: peace, prosperity, and planet. So the new Southern Policy has also 3 Ps: peace, prosperity, and people. So beyond the economic cooperation and beyond the Korea investment in Myanmar, there are notable some expectation and achievements between the people-to-people community. So the NSP has been also overviewed and reviewed by the government themselves. And as for the government of Myanmar, we also have to review our own MSGP and also with the COVID plan, economic recovery plan. But one successful cooperation that I would like to share is about the people-to-people community in this regard. There is the Project K, as well as the Myanmar education response and recovery plan for the future in the post-COVID-19. So the Embassy of Korea in Myanmar has been very actively bridging for this NSP and Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan and the COVID-19 to be in the same platform. So they give some model even in the health, test, treat, and another one is test, treat, and trace. So that is also one thing that we have been taking that model. And another one is blended learning. And the Korean model has also given us some plans how we can move forward for this plan. So this is some of the achievements for the new Southern Policy beyond the economic cooperation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And the next question is for Dr. Ashley Sharp. Given track record of 2 general elections of 1990 and 2015, with average seat distribution of 70 to 80% seats for NLD, about 12% seats for ethnic parties, and between 5% to 10% seats for pro-military parties, and 25% seats reserved for the military in the parliament. What real change the upcoming election can bring?
Yes, good questions. And I think the answer is implicit that probably the change will be limited. I think that Nick, in his comments, suggested that likely the NLD will be returned perhaps with a slightly smaller majority. In a couple of the ethnic states, Shan State and Rakhine State in particular, we might expect to see ethnic political parties challenge the NLD for a majority in the state hlutors. Of course, this is complicated by the fact and by the, I think, almost rather suspicious coincidence that Shan State and Rakhine State, where ethnic political parties are strongest, these are also the states which have the most widespread armed conflict. And these are the two states where it's most likely that at least some of the polling stations will be closed. And that maybe allows me to briefly bring up the issue of voter suppression in the forthcoming elections, because it seems to me there are at least three different ways in which the elections risk being neither free nor fair. The first one is about security. The Myanmar army can instruct the Union Election Commission that if the security situation deteriorates, then polling stations won't be open and then people can't vote. And of course, the areas where the security situation is most likely to impact the polls, Rakhine State, Shan State, some parts of Karen and Kachin also. These are areas where ethnic nationality people live and where ethnic political parties would expect to do relatively well. So I think the security situation is likely to mean that ethnic political parties will underperform in at least some areas, including Shan and Rakhine, where there might be expectations of ethnic parties actually challenging to control the state hlutor. I think another aspect of voter suppression in Myanmar would be the situation of 3 million Myanmar migrant workers living in neighboring Thailand and also in other countries overseas, plus perhaps 1 million migrant workers. Again, not all, but a majority of these people, migrant workers, come from ethnic nationality communities, and very few of them are enfranchised. Very few of them will have the chance to vote. So this again will diminish the pool of ethnic voters. Of course, this is a very simplistic analysis because not all ethnic people will vote for ethnic parties, but presumably most voters for ethnic parties will be drawn from the pool of ethnic nationality citizens. And I think the other aspect which risks the credibility of the elections is COVID. I agree with the other speakers that it's very unlikely the elections will be postponed, but it's noteworthy that a number of parties, including the USDP and ethnic parties, have called for the elections postponed because with the restrictions of COVID-19, campaigning is severely curtailed, and that gives a great advantage to the NLD government with the power of the incumbency. The government, of course, is to some degree at least providing relief assistance to civilians, citizens in Myanmar, and that power of patronage allows the NLD much greater exposure and opportunities to campaign implicitly, at least in a way that other parties are denied. So I think there are serious concerns around the credibility of the elections for these three reasons. But I guess more specifically for the question, of course, the percentages quoted are for the number of seats in Parliament, and that's the reality which everyone has to deal with. But it's a first past the post system in Myanmar, and that seems to me particularly ill suited to such an ethnically diverse country. And there have over the years been calls for a different voting system of proportional representation. It's striking, for example, that at least in the 1990 elections, you know, the NLD got, I think it was 63, 68% of the votes, but 89% parliamentary seats, and these kind of patterns have been repeated since. So I think given the first past the post system, and particularly the advantages of incumbency and under COVID-19 conditions, that probably we won't see much change as a result of these elections.
All right, thank you. Now the next question is for Dr. Min Zaw. Looking ahead, it would be worthwhile to know whether the NLD has an effective second line of leadership and possible head of the party as and when Aung San Suu Kyi decides to retire.
The NLD officially never talk about the second line or who's going to be the successors of the Aung San Suu Kyi. That is, they are tightly girded of this. And even in the NLD, there are a lot of speculations and also there are internal struggles among the leadership, who can be the successor or who can be the leader of the political of the NLD.
All right, thank you very much. Now we have about 6 minutes or so. I want each speaker to please respond, be precise with your answer, maybe not more than 1 minute, because I would like to go the third round with my own question as the chair of the session. Now I would like to go to Nick first. What is your assessment of the state of ethnic political parties going into general election 2020?
Yeah, thanks very much. Great question on which I can wrap up my contribution this afternoon. And again, thanks very much for such a rich and lively conversation. Ethnic parties, of course, are varied, and to talk about them simply as ethnic parties, I think, is often to miss a great deal of that diversity. Some are incredibly resilient, often drawing strength, as we've heard already from other speakers, from a patchwork of armed ethnic organizations. Some others, though, just benefit from the incredible, even visceral divisions and factionalization that mark Myanmar society. The fact, as you've just heard, that it's the Shan and Rakhine states that are the most likely to vote adamantly against the incumbent government, and where, of course, there's a great deal of ongoing conflict, is a reminder that these ethnic political organizations that find themselves elected to represent their people in Naypyidaw have all manner of other layers of connection and affection that are not captured by the formal electoral system. And I think in that context, most of them are going to struggle. We've got a lot of parties that won't win a single seat, not even at the state level. Then there are some that may pick up a few seats here and there. And then there are a very small number of political parties in Rakhine, Shan state, maybe in the Kachin state, let's see how it goes, where there's going to be a much stronger performance, meaning that for the state level Tlutos, we could have an interesting set of outcomes with the NLD forced into some more meaningful negotiations, which might not be a bad thing.
All right, thank you. Next question is Dr. Singh. The international community has condemned the electoral processes in Myanmar as it is marred with systemic problems and rights abuses. To add to this, there has been an increase in the COVID-19 cases. How would all of this affect the elections, and what do you think can be done to protect the integrity of the elections?
Well, I must say that there is no perfect election in the world, and Myanmar is really in the second transitional period. As you know, the first transitional period, it was in 2011, and the election went well, but without fair. It is free. And if we look back to the 2015 again, there is a setup of one institution, Union Election Commission, but people say that, oh, the chairman is unfair, will be unfair. But look at the outcome of the 2015 election. The people and international community applaud for that. Oh, it's free and fair election. And by looking at the 2017 election again, it is free and fair. But now again, for the 2020 election, people are blaming again to the chair of the UEC. Oh, the chair cannot be free and fair. But I must say that even the first transitional government or the second transitional government, Myanmar is trying their best among these many ethnic people and with the civil society organizations. So let's wait and see. For the 2020 election, it's coming and it's really exciting. Only one thing is how can we, prevent from the COVID-19? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ashley, this is your question. is the Myanmar government aware that there is a kind of voice in the US Congress that if the government still has no process in Rohingya Bengali issue, some people in Congress will support the land in Arakan led by Bengalis or Rohingyas being divided from Myanmar? What would be the possible reaction from the Tatmadaw?
If I understood the question correctly, I'm not sure the change of government, if there is one in the US, will make a huge difference. It's not really my area of specialization, but I think it's probably a fairly rare example in the US these days of a bipartisan issue. I think there's probably quite widespread concern about the plight of the Rohingya in Myanmar. And my guess is that whoever wins the elections in the US, that the next administration will likely focus quite strongly on the rights of the Rohingya. In terms of the specific question, I don't think it will make a huge difference. Although it is, I think, really worrying that when there are in the immediate aftermath of very serious human rights violations, which arguably constitute genocide, that there's a global attention and outcry on the situation of the Rohingya. And usually quite quickly that drops down the global international advocacy and news agenda. So I think it's quite important that those of us who focus on Myanmar more or less full time continue to insist on talking about the Rohingya and not acquiescing in any sort of like marginalization in our own talks and discourse.
All right, for this question is for Dr. Min Zaw. How do Myanmar's current civil military leaders view current US election? Is Myanmar worried about the return of the Democratic Party in the US? Please unmute your speaker.
I'm sorry, you've been cut off. I could barely hear you. Can you just repeat it?
How do Myanmar's current civil military leaders view the US election? Is Myanmar worried about the return of the Democratic Party?
No, actually. To be precise, Myanmar transition and the government of Myanmar and the relationship with US was much better under the President Obama than the current administrations. And there was much more engagement between Myanmar and the United States before the President Trump came in. And I don't think the US election have any significant, and the Myanmar side has almost no consideration of who will be in power in the United States, either the Democrats or Republicans.
All right, thank you. As a chair, I would like to pose one-liner question to all the speakers, please. Nicolas, let me start with you. I'm going to ask the same question to everyone. Please be short and precise. Which party is likely to win and what percentage? Nicolas?
Yeah, it's a great question. Nice way to end. So the NLD will win the election, I have no doubt, and they will win a grand total of 72% of the vote.
Okay, great. Ashley, sorry, Dr. Chocho Singh?
For my opinion, yes, the NLD will win, but not 72%. It might be like 65%, because in the ethnic area, definitely the Rakhine and the Shan and the Mon, they are going to take the seats.
All right, Ashley, same question to you.
I'm going to go halfway between the two. So that is 68.5% for the NLD.
Okay, Dr. Min Zaw?
I think it will all depends on the turnout rate. The turnout rate will define how much seats NLD going to win. NLD going to still win the majority, but if the low turnout, NLD percentage can be much decreased. So I don't want to make a prediction at this point.
All right, no problem. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite my research assistant, Hari Haran, to say the vote of thanks. Hari?
Thank you, Dr. Kibin. It was, I would like to agree upon, probably everybody would agree upon that. The entire discussion was really wonderful. yeah, providing a lot of insights. A special thanks to Dr. Kipgin, of course, for chairing this discussion efficiently, and to Dr. Farley for concisely summing up the nuisance of electoral politics and social dynamics within Myanmar, especially amid COVID-19, since the election is happening amid COVID-19. And to Dr. Sen for putting up nicely on the complex dynamics of the foreign relations of Myanmar, especially with West amid Rohingya crisis, and as well as providing key alternative pathways that can be where Myanmar can overlook beyond China without completely de-aligning from China, such as Japan, and also the concept of Indo-Pacific and look east policy, as well as to Dr. South, which I'm pretty sure that by now everybody would have given had received a new perspective to think about on ethnic identities and nationalistic policies. And also you gave a personal touch by bringing up your interactions with the local populace. So that's a nice touch to it. Thank you, Professor. And finally to Dr. Min Zhao. I mean, he efficiently and extensively explained us the transition of Myanmar's trajectory towards democracy, and also the role of military in the current politics, as well as providing some predictions to the upcoming elections, which was quite insightful. Thank you once again. Thank you all speakers. And I would like to revert back to the Dr. Kipgen for any final words. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Hariharan. Once again, I would like to thank all the speakers, Nicholas, Ashley, Cho, and Min, for your extensive and excellent insights to Myanmar's upcoming election. And we look forward to whatever happens in the election. And then I hope to see you again in person sooner than later, and so that we can continue to discuss what we love to discuss about Myanmar's politics. Until we meet again, thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.